Hey, what's going on, guys? Dom the Movie Nerd here, and have you heard the good word? Game of Thrones is back! Well, not really, but the first official spin-off, House of the Dragon, is set to premiere next year on HBO, and that got me thinking about how Game of Thrones, the #1 most-watched show for a decade, just seemingly disappeared from the culture after that god-awful finale. And I wanted to find out why, which is why I'm proud to present the newest hit show from the Talkin' TV network, Talkin' Thrones, the new weekly show where myself and friend of the channel, Professor Pat Huber, get together to break down each and every single episode of this hit show. We've got focus character segments, we break down the lore, we go over some old reviews, all to get to the question of where did this show go wrong? It's a really fun time. You guys are not going to want to miss this. So head over to the Talkin' TV channel on YouTube and Spotify to check it out. We go live every Sunday at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Audio goes up the following Saturday. It's going to be a really great time as we once again battle it out for the throne. Holy shit, Chris, I didn't think it was possible. We actually got a good movie in 2021. Like, how? Just how?
Yeah.
I mean, James Gunn, first off, so...
No, I'm totally at a loss for words. I mean, after sitting through weeks of movies like Zola, Saw, whatever, Spiral, whatever you want to call it, and then most recently, the biggest atrocity of the year, Old, it's so refreshing to have a movie I actually enjoy watching.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. And also, we have a special guest on this episode, first time to the podcast, but has commented before, Dustin, the Duster Mason. Dustin, I like to call you the secret to my success. I'm so happy to finally have you on the podcast. How you doing, man?
I'm all right. Can't wait to talk about James Gunn's The Suicide Squad.
Yep, with the in the title being the most key point. We're talking about everything related to the Suicide Squad today, all of that and more. Stay tuned. Always go to click the intro button and then we click it at the same time, so it ends up like canceling itself out. But
And I don't know why you go to click the intro button, because I'm the one who does the graphics.
I know.
Yeah.
I should know it at this point. It's a force of habit, I'll call it. Let's just say it at that. But people, we're back. We're talking about The Suicide Squad, the first actual good movie that we've gotten to talk about on this podcast in months. Like, it's kind of crazy. Like, I never thought that I would say this, that even though obviously 2020 was the year of the pandemic and that just sucked overall in general, I gotta say the vast majority of movies I liked in 2020 more than 2021. Like, I mean, look, we all know, I think it's safe to say the Suicide Squad was always going to be one of the better movies to come out this year, but like, I guess just, it's kind of elevated by just kind of the lack of quality overall that we've had from the vast majority of movies this year. You know, Chris, you've talked in vast extent about how TV is kicking movies' ass. Dustin, I know you and I have talked about just our vast disappointment in a majority of the movies that have come out this year. Like, Chris, do you have anything else to add to that before we actually get started?
No, I think it's all going to come out throughout the conversation, that's for sure. But yeah, I don't know. Television is certainly doing what I hope it would do and thrive this year. And I also hope movies would do well. But I mean, it seems like we just keep getting stinker after stinker until one said Suicide Squad 2. So yeah, I think it's just time to get into the movie, man. We have a new guest, first time on the podcast. Like, why don't we just toss it over to Dustin and he can start off with like his spoiler-free thoughts and just sort of give us like, I don't know, like your impressions of this film without... We'll butcher some plot points later for people, but for now, let's just be a little friendly.
Well, first and foremost, before we actually got into the review, I wanted Dustin, because Dustin's got an interesting relationship with not only this movie, but with the first movie. So, like, Dustin, I want you to go into, like, your thoughts on, like, this movie going in, coming from the last one, right? Your take on the last one and kind of just the transition and the evolution, right, of kind of the Suicide Squad mantra movie from 2016 to now.
All right, I'll start chronologically then. Suicide Squad 2016, directed by David Ayer. I was incredibly looking forward to. I think everybody was. That first trailer that came out was dope, and then there was a trailer with Bohemian Rhapsody playing, and it was so good it could have won a best, original short film at the Oscars. That's how fucking good that trailer was. And then the movie came out, and it ended up being barely a movie, really. It was a combined cut of like a trailer house cut, because that's how good the trailer was for that movie, that the studio hired them to do a cut, re-edit a cut of this movie. and they did a cut for that, and they showed a cut for David Ayer's version of the film. They both did not test well, so they, the conclusion of that was like, let's just combine them, and we got the movie we got, and it was a humongous mess. Even though I do enjoy it, I don't think it's an awful film. I think technically it's not well written, but I think there's definitely energy put into it. There is a heart there throughout all that, horrible color hues and, just terrible CGI, but good makeup. It won the Oscar, but, and the performances really drive that movie. But when we get into the Suicide Squad, directed by James Gunn, it's better in every way. From the marketing, with that, that great trailer, that's even better than the Bohemian Rhapsody trailer with that Dirty Work sample. It's just so good. And we see the actual film, it's better in every way. The cast is better. The visuals is way better. The makeup's way better. The writing is not even comparable to the fucking first movie. It's so well done, and it's hilarious. It's harsh. It has some of the harshest violence I've ever seen in my life in a film. And this is the guy that made Super. Okay, so this guy knows how to fucking make like palatable, violent, harsh, hilarious, dark comedies. And that's what the first one should have been. It was a little too dour, and then it was a little too light at points. This juggles tones perfectly and brilliantly. And we'll get into the cast later, but I enjoyed everyone. And I was saying as the Dom before the show, I don't think I disliked a single performance in this film. Yeah. And I think it's a fantastic film.
Absolutely.
Can't wait to talk about it.
Absolutely. So, like, as far as the transition and kind of the journey that we've had from the first one to now, it's obviously just been kind of, a kind of leapfrog stepping stone exercise, kind of like what Harley was doing in the movie, as far as just how the studio was juggling, obviously where Warner Brothers was back in 2016, where they are now with trying to constantly compete with Marvel and trying to put out these properties that constantly just seem to be on every other end of the spectrum, because you had, after the whole 2016 debacle, you had Wonder Woman, which was for the most part positively received. Then you had Justice League, which for the most part, the original cut, which was for the most part critically maligned. Then you had Aquaman a year later, which, say what you will about the movie, but the movie was a smash hit. Like, it was like one of the highest grossing movies of 2018. For the most part, loved around the board. Then you had Shazam, which was kind of a weird, lesser family-friendly movie. Then you start, the spin-off material where you start to do movies outside of, the actual DC universe, where you have the Joaquin Phoenix Joker movie, which is really not tied into this main universe at all. And then, obviously, you have the pandemic that sets in. And then you have everything that's happened since, right? With Wonder Woman 84, which supposedly takes place in the same continuity, even though that feels like a completely different movie, tonally. And then you've got the Snyder Justice League, and now you've got this, where Warner is in this really weird position where, again, in the complete opposite stance of where they were back in 2016, they seem to be doing the opposite of what Marvel is doing. And Gunn has even talked about this in the behind the scenes of this movie, where they are actually letting the artists and the creatives make essentially their own movies. Because, say what you will about the Aquaman movie, but that feels like a James Wan movie. And the Shazam movie, that feels like a David F. Sandberg movie, And Wonder Woman 84, problematic and flawed as that movie was, and really, frankly, terrible as that movie was, that still feels like a Patty Jenkins movie. So I'm not going to necessarily say that they've learned their lesson, because as we still know, there is no sense of overlying continuity. But Chris, I know for a fact you have made your thoughts very vocal on just kind of the DC and the Marvel versus of it all. So, tell me, just first and foremost, did you, as a diehard DC comic book fan, did you get everything and more that you could have possibly wanted from this movie?
Oh, 110%. I mean, this movie completely, I'll say it, just took me by surprise. I did not, I heard it was going to be good, and, I knew it was going to be good. Just the trailers were awesome, and like Dustin was saying, just so charming, and just really, they know how to hook you with this one. And, boy, did they undersell it, because I was even more taken by this film than I thought I could be. It was just such an enjoyable watch, and it did everything that you kind of want DC to do, DC doesn't need to play ball with Marvel. First of all, they were first, so it's I don't know why we're trying to do this catch-up game, insert joke at minute 32 like every other Marvel film has type nonsense. We don't need to do that. That's what I respected so much about the Snyder trilogy. It was very much so, as flawed as it wasn't trying to play ball, I felt personally, with the whole Marvel-ness of the homogenization of superheroes. And so this film, I think did what all good movies should do if they're about superheroes, characters that have such rich and long-standing stories, a plethora of different installments you could pull from. It played to the strengths of the characters, and it didn't fit a formula. It was just really characterization at its best with an amazing plot that really helped to make this pretty large ensemble shine. And it was, I don't know, like, because we'll get into the specific nitty gritty soon. I feel like we're nearing the end of the spoiler free section, but what I'll leave my sentiment at is this movie is the best of DC. And I think the best of the superhero genre. It's just unfortunate that I don't think where it's gonna, because A, the box office has been so pitiful, and B, just everything is so, like I said, homogenized. I don't think it's gonna change anything, but it's nice to have a little light in the darkness is how I see it.
Yeah, it's I find it funny, obviously, that you're talking about superheroes when the bulk of the cast of this movie is supervillains. Like, my whole thing with this movie, if I could just get my spoiler-free thoughts
well,
out
it's
of
the
way,
superhero genre, though.
Right.
So.
It's the comic book genre overall. Is that I've been talking a lot in the last couple of years about just comic book storytelling and how really after Endgame, comic book storytelling has really evolved to the point of now where we are essentially doing the equivalent of comic book storytelling now on the big screen, where before it's like we were still kind of doing them as movies or attempting to do. And now we are seeing like these now long-form comics stories take place over the course of, like, you know, as TV shows, as movies. We can have like these one-off movies that supposedly take place in the same continuity, but really they're only connected via the characters, right? I do find it interesting that obviously, with the reception of the first one, Gunn has his pick of the litter and picks and chooses the characters that he wants to bring back for the first one. And I do find that very interesting that he does that, obviously with the exception of Will Smith. But as for my spoiler-free thoughts on this movie, look, it's been a rough year. It's been a rough year movie-wise. And after letdown, July, which quite possibly was the worst month of this whole year, where just every movie I either just wasn't a fan of or it was just a giant fucking flop. Overall, in every conceivable sense, it was so beyond refreshing because James Gunn does it now twice. He did it back in 2014 with the first Guardians of the Galaxy, where I'm like, okay, what is this movie going to be? And that movie ends up being not only one of the best of Marvel, but ultimately a cultural landmark, and he nails it again here. Everything about this movie works. There was not a single dull moment. The action is on point. The characterization is on point. Like Dustin said, there's not a single bad performance in this entire movie. The soundtrack crushes. It holds up to its mantra of really, like, don't get attached. These characters are expendable. You know what it is? Without spoiling anything, it ultimately, I think, solves one of the biggest problems of the first one, which is that it actually knows how to handle its premise, which is that the Suicide Squad as a concept is constantly at bat with the idea of just forget the superhero movies, just traditional movie marketing in general, because the whole point is you want to market off likable characters that people are going to want to stick with and root for through the entire time. And that goes against everything that the Suicide Squad as a concept stands for. The whole thing is that they are villains, they are expendable, they are put in this black ops unit that 9 times out of 10 they go on missions that they will not come back from, and Gunn recognizes all of those elements and manages to translate that in a way that is not only palatable for audiences just in general, but also really fucking fun and really funny and really gruesome and just real. It has so much heart in all of the best ways, right? It's funny, I saw elements of Guardians of the Galaxy in here, right? And as far as maybe the setup of like the initial squad as to what we get, sure, there are comparisons that you can make there, but as the film goes on, it definitely develops this really unique identity in and of itself. And this movie really truly is something special, not just for the year of 2021, not just for comic book movies, not just for DC, but just like as a film, just in general, it works. And I really think it's going to go down, withstand, you know, just the current climate of movies that we're in right now as just one of the greats, just in general. So those are spoiler-free thoughts. So the one thing I will say now is we're about to dive heavy into spoilers. So again, the movie is on HBO Max, but I know obviously that, you know, just because of the inherent nature of this movie, there are a lot of people who still haven't seen it. So I cannot stress this enough. If you do not want to get spoiled on this movie, click out of this video now, go watch it, and then come back later on because we are about to talk some spoilers. And as always, people, you know what to do. Click the comment. Leave a comment below, click the subscribe button, click the like button, and always be sure to keep coming back for more content. So guys, let's talk about all the people who died, because like there are a lot of people who died in this movie. Like, first of all, just the fact that Gunn pulls off probably the biggest ensemble cast that he's ever had. Like, what are there? Just of the squad alone, there's like, what, 16 members? At least that we started out with? 17? Right, it's ridiculous if we count Flag.
I didn't count them.
I think it's 16
Oh, okay.
supervillains.
I would count him. I mean, he kind of got screwed over too by Waller. Let's be honest.
Kind of, but that's just what makes his
Sending
character so
him in
good.
as
Like,
the distraction mission. I don't know. I think he was just as disposable as the rest of them. But hey, 16, 17. Let us know in the comments your thoughts on that. But yeah, Dom, take it away.
like, I mean, look, I don't want to like venture a guess because I don't want to like compare myself to other people in that sense. But like, I don't know. Like, did you guys find it obvious that like that whole squad that they were assembling of like Captain Boomerang and Savant, all those guys in the beginning, that they were like kind of be the distraction? They were gonna get killed in the first 15 minutes. Like, did you guys get like any sense of that? Because like in a weird
immediately?
way, not immediately, but like I thought
Like when they
marketing,
come on screen? No, I feel like as soon as we cut back to the other team coming on the island, that's when I realized that's their point. They were literally just there to die, and Amanda Waller's mean and just ruthless.
Yeah, I'm right there with Dustin on that one. I think you have to be a fortune teller to that one. They sold it really
that was
well.
clever
I thought.
how it was executed.
Yeah,
Pun intended.
Yeah,
exactly.
Really,
They really pulled the wool over your eyes with that one in a very brilliant way, I thought.
But yeah, so what fooled me there is a sense of like I had a pretty good idea in my head. I'm like, oh, none of these guys are making it. Like all of those initial like C tier squad members, like aside from Harley and Rick, because we saw them in like the rest of the movie, I'm like, none of these guys are making it past the opening 15 minutes. But the way that both the trailer executed it and the way that the movie executed it, as far as like showing it, like having that be the exposition scene, but also like some of the one of the best opening scenes, quite frankly, just that I've ever seen, just in general. But like how they utilize that as like they were like the distraction squad, of like and just like uses Waller, and like how they were all like Waller's chess pieces. Like first of all, like Waller, who was already Viola Davis's performance as that character was already one of the best parts of that first movie, and ultimately Gunn like one ups it here by just really exposing like the sadistic elements of her personality. As far as that goes, like, it was brilliantly done as far as that goes. And then we get into the actual members of our squad, who are revealed to be at least the initial 5 before they gain more as the movie goes on, which are revealed to be Idris Elba's Bloodsport, John Cena's Peacemaker, Daniela Melchior's Ratcatcher 2, David Dastmalchian's Polka Dot Man, and then Sylvester Stallone, obviously, or Nanaue, as voiced by Sylvester Stallone. And man, just like everything that Gunn said that he was going for, as far as this being like a war movie, a Dirty Dozen movie, a Man on a Mission movie, a Snatch and Grab movie, like they were like, Dustin, were you getting Inglourious Bastards vibes here? Like with like the certain of the title, I was sort of getting that bit throughout the movie.
I was mainly just trying to figure out where have I heard that opening credit song, because it just reminded me of like Dawn of the Dead, like the Zack Snyder.
Oh, the Johnny Cash song?
No, the one with when the opening credits are playing.
Oh yeah,
These the people who died.
Yep.
Who died? I was like, was that in the Zack Snyder movie before?
I haven't seen the Zack Snyder Dawn of the Dead, so it may very well be. But
Yeah,
there was a lot of I felt Snyderisms in this one. I mean, he did produce it, but sometimes that just means throwing money at it. I was wondering throughout it to the length of his involvement.
Yeah, it was giving me like early
it's
Zack Snyder vibes for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, it was definitely interesting in that sense, but like just the way that the movie handles its vast cast, right? Like it does the very smart thing where, aside from a few key players in that initial squad, like Michael Rooker, who's obviously the intro person, Weasel, who's obviously the joke, Captain Boomerang, because he's the character we know from the previous movie, and then Pete Davidson, who again we know is Pete Davidson, right? Like I think they do a really good job of giving us not really enough, but like just enough to realize it's like, oh, we're not going to be spending the rest of the movie with these characters. And the way that it circles back, the way that it edits in like the previous time sequence, like it's brilliantly handled.
I would beg to differ though, because they kind of fool you by throwing Flag and Harley Quinn in there, and that kind of makes you think like, okay, they're forming some connections. Harley Quinn does tend to have silly, ridiculous bonds with characters throughout movies, and so I think that they kind of did a good job. Like Dustin said, you really only realize it unless you're a fortune teller, when you see the other squad come up on the beach and Idris Elba's like, hey, we just saw an explosion, and Waller says, oh, well, don't worry about that. That was to help you guys out, or whatever her exact verbiage was. But Dustin, what's your take on that?
Well, that opening sequence was great. With the first Suicide Squad, the first team that we're introduced to. But Jai Courtney was one of my favorite parts unexpectedly of the first film. I thought he was easily the funniest part and like kind of the most interesting of the bunch, because all he does is throw boomerangs and drink and is obsessed with unicorns for some reason. I don't know, but he was funny in that movie, and I wanted this movie to, like, even if they kill him off, they were going to do right by him. And they did, like, immediately within the first 10 minutes of the film. Like, you see him actually throw a fucking boomerang in this movie, and he slices somebody's throat and head. So that was awesome. That was a great payoff for that character. And then when you see him in the opening credits, is you know, when he dies, he gets like an epic death where he's kind of like smiling, or he's kind of accepting it, where it's just like, and then you're sad, right? And then you see him in the opening credits with the boomerang still in his arm. So, like, they didn't really shit on Captain Boomerang. They killed him off, but they respected him, and I like that. So if you like them in the first movie, you're not going to be pissed off, I don't think.
And that's the interesting thing, too, is for both with the Captain Boomerang of it and with the connections to the first one, because you're right, because I feel like the red herring with the Captain Boomerang thing at the beginning, as far as fooling you, is the sense that, like, usually when you talk about kind of the Trinity that's usually in, like, most of the iterations of the various iterations of the Suicide Squad over the years, it's usually three people. It's Harley Quinn, Deadshot, and Captain Boomerang. So that's what kind of fooled me there. And as far as kind of how, like, the connections to the first one go, like, I think this movie does the best possible thing in that, with the exception of, like, a few choice lines in the beginning when Harley gets on the plane and Boomerang asks her, like, what she's doing back in jail. It's like the movie essentially acts as both a soft reboot, but it's not necessarily like forgetting anything from the first movie. Like, sure, there are slightly different characterization. Like, it's very odd. Like, the Rick Flag here is a much different Rick Flag than we got in the first one, because I think Joel Kinnaman, both with his transition of, like, you know, where he was career-wise back in 2016 versus where he is now, and also kind of with the transition, everything that he's been, also under Gunn's direction, like, it feels like a much more fleshed out character. It feels like he has much more to do. And then after that opening sequence, once we get into the actual antics of the actual squad that we spend the majority of the movie with and getting to know their dynamics, it's amazingly well done. I think one of my favorite sequences is that opening campfire scene where Bloodsport wakes up, sees Polka Dot Man expelling the dots, and then he sees King Shark almost eating Ratcatcher, immediately shoots him, has the shooting scene, and then Ratcatcher at the moment. Then you see fucking John Cena come out in the fucking whitey tighties, and already within the first 10 minutes, John Cena is one light years better than he was in F9. Like, because it's the whole thing with Gunn and wrestlers, where he knows how to get performances and play to wrestlers' strengths. And everything that Cena is doing in this movie, I saw a really interesting meme online that kind of described, it's like, well, where, like, Cena's direction that he was given was, like, to play it as a douchey Captain America. But I saw this meme and it actually pointed out he's more so like a version of the comedian from Watchmen, where he's like this jingoistic, ruthless killer. The only difference really is that he still thinks that he's doing everything that he's doing for, like, the right reasons, at least all the way until the end, where he fully accepts that he is this hedonistic killer. But the movie, I said this to Chris too, the movie does this exceptional job of this balancing act where the movie introduces them as villains, sort of kind of gets you to know each and every one of them in their own way, makes you feel sorry for them, at least at certain points, and then pulls the wool back in the last minute to remind you, no, these guys are fucking villains. You know, they're not assholes, but they're villains. Their interests are still their own, you know? And, like, that's a really, really tough sell, especially in today's modern movie market, where everything has to be so PC and so kosher, and all the characters always have to be likable. And it's just refreshing to see, like, a movie where it's like, yeah, you can have unlikable characters, because that's what TV's been doing for the last, like, 10, 15 years now.
And I just kind of want to take it over here for a second while you're speaking about, you know, the PC being infused into film and TV. And I think sometimes it's almost that is the plot and the story. And I'm not saying I stand on any side of the aisle, but what I'm saying is, if there was a way to do sort of undertones or messaging that does not step on the toes of your film or take away from the characters or the hard work being put in by the cast and crew, I think it is with John Cena's Peacemaker. I loved the political message there, sort of like the diehard patriot who will kill for his country because he's just so blinded by, you know, his love for his nation. I think it's a very interesting social commentary to make, but the thing about it is, it's not blatant, in my opinion. It wasn't forced down your throat. It was there if you wanted it, and you could read into that if you wanted it. But I felt that it also was not something that the movie was built on. It was just an added depth to the character, while also filmmakers doing what they do, which, again, we have freedom of expression. I'm totally cool with that, making a statement, but it was done in a way where I thought there was a level of class. And I don't know, I felt like there was other commentaries as well made throughout this film.
Oh, absolutely.
But again, like, it never stepped on the toes of what we were watching. And before we bring it back to you, Dom, I don't know, Dustin, how did you feel about that? And kind of like, you know, what's your take? Do you agree? Do you disagree? I'm curious.
Feel about what in particular about
Like, the way that Gunn infused social commentary into this movie? Do you think it was egregious? Do you think it was subtle? What's your take on that?
It was definitely subtle. That it didn't really distract me or anything. It was just, it felt like a comic book movie in like the best possible way. Like you didn't have to take it too seriously, which I appreciate personally. And it was just his signature style of humor and his signature style of action, and he keeps improving on each film. And he's just a wonderful director. I can't get enough of his films at all.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I think it's definitely interesting where it's like kind of the for lack of a better word, like the political connections, right? Where obviously, again, it's a comic book movie. It's escapist. I think it does a really good job as far as like kind of allowing you to like escape into the fantasy, but at the same time, like it does make statements on, I think really interestingly, but like that's always been the nature of the Squad. Almost every single mission that the Suicide Squad has gone on, they always end up finding out that they've been double-crossed, screwed over, some crucial detail has not been told them, right? And that plays out in a very divisive way once we get to the third act of the movie. Obviously, once they get onto the island, and then once they're going through, and once they meet like kind of the political dissidents, and like one of the most brilliantly set up and played out jokes in the movie where they're going through the camp, who they've been told are dangerous army members. They brutally murder every one of them. Then they find out that they're members of the rebel faction, and they're like, "Oh shit!"
Yeah. Know what I noticed on a rewatch though? Like I didn't realize this the first time. Amanda Waller tells them before they go into the camp, "Oh, kill anybody you see. They're the most dangerous people in the world."
Yep.
And if I have one problem about like the Joel Kinnaman character is that there wasn't enough like explanation as to why he's like doing all of this for Waller still, especially since she's like trying to get him killed the whole time.
Right.
I didn't really understand.
Right.
I thought that was the one hole in this movie that I can't really overlook. And that's what I wanted to say before about Joel Kinnaman, but I didn't want to interrupt.
It's definitely
No, that's a good I'd say that's a good point there, because his motivation was a bit clouded. And you know, I also wanted to comment on Joel Kinnaman. He's so confusing to me just as an actor, because he'll do a great performance in For All Mankind season 2, and he'll have a decent performance in Suicide Squad 2, but it's like for every one good performance, there's like 3 terrible ones. I just don't understand him. He's very, just as a performer, he's very confusing. I feel like he really is very circumstantial. And but he's such a big name, and it doesn't. I just feel like I'm in the minority on that one, but it just always blows my mind, because I didn't think he was like amazing in this film, but I also didn't think he was flat like I've seen him be in other properties. So I don't know. I just kind of wanted to. He was definitely an improvement from the first movie. The way he was more into the character and stuff, even with the clouding of his motivation, which I do agree. I think if there was one sort of thread that didn't quite feel as tight as all the rest, I think it would be that one. But I don't know. I wanted to just chime in on that with Kinnaman, because he's such an anomaly in my brain.
Yeah, because like when it's like introduced in the third act, like immediately, like it's rushed to the fact that he just wants to like uncover this conspiracy that's like that America's behind and Amanda Waller knows about. And then John Cena comes out of nowhere and is like, "No, I got a mission of my own, motherfucker. I can kill you. Like you give me that disc." And it's like rushed. It's well executed, but it's like a little rushed. And it's just like, is Amanda Waller like really aware of that? Like, is she approves of that? But okay.
Yeah. Well, we already know that like Amanda Waller is perfectly fine with just like murdering and experimenting on children, especially since like, well, we know the U.S. government obviously sanctioned the Thinkers experiments there, obviously before the coup that happens prior to this movie, and Waller is clearly sending in the Squad in order to cover everything up. And again, not to like, I guess answer the flaw, but I guess if there was like one reason, it would probably be because she knew the real reason why she was setting in the Squad, and she probably knew that like kind of Flag's moral high ground, right? And she probably definitely didn't want to risk him potentially stumbling in on that. So if for nothing else, like Waller definitely demonstrates in this movie like just how ruthless she is. I mean, she had that one moment in the last movie where she killed like all the members of all the people that were in the room with her, but that scene really just felt like it was just completely out of nowhere, and felt like it was just thrown in there to be like, oh, here's how ruthless Amanda Waller is. But in this movie, I definitely think they did a much better job, like straight from the get-go, where she's perfectly willing to let Bloodsport's daughter get thrown in Belle Rev and murdered. She's perfectly cool with that. And I think the other thing too that they did is her kind of little staff room just in general. I think they did an excellent job of kind of them kind of realizing just how like fucked up their boss is and just like the lows that she will. She even says it. She's like, you have no idea how far I'm willing to go.
You know, speaking of loose threads, though, I think maybe perhaps another one that just poked out to me, speaking of the staff room, amazing characterizations there. You don't get to spend too much time with them, but everything was clear and I thought really well thought out and well executed, except for when they knock her out and she comes back to consciousness and there's seemingly no penalties for knocking out like your superior officer, your commander. I think maybe that might be the second thread that's just not as tight as I would have wanted it to be.
Well, when you see the two agents at the end of the, in the second post-credit scene, you don't see the one that knocked her out.
That's true.
You don't know what happened to that.
Good point. That's a good point.
You don't know what happened to fucking her, all right?
That's true. That's true.
Yeah.
The other two got fucked over, but where did the other one go?
Yeah, definitely. Oh man.
All right, so maybe not as thin of a thread as I might have thought.
And also, like, if I have a tiny nitpick, but like, it could not have been more obvious that Gunn originally intended to have Peacemaker die. And then when WB greenlit the Peacemaker TV show that's coming out on HBO Max, it was like, obvious reshoot. Here we go. And I don't know. Like, I know. And like, I don't necessarily like, that was the only kind of like moment that stood out to me.
Was it a reshoot?
Oh, the post, absolutely. It was a reshoot. It was like, he even said it. He's like, yeah, that was a reshoot.
All right.
Interesting. I mean, I don't know. I think hearing that now kind of gets me a little bummed out because I think it's, that comes down to what I hate artists doing, which is like sacrificing creative integrity for potential dollars down the line. But if there was anyone I trust with the vision, it's Gunn. So I'll let it slide this one time.
Right.
Not that my opinion matters to him, but
I also just wanted to talk about just like the rest of the characters and just like how well they did, because like, again, like with the main members of the squad, like first off you get Bloodsport, right? Idris Elba, who it could not have been more obvious that they had him shoot in as their backup for when Will Smith, when Will Smith wouldn't want to come back. And then for whatever reason, like Will Smith said, no, I might want to come back for this movie. So they're like, okay, we'll just make this a different character. And like Idris Elba, to me, like, don't get me wrong, I liked Will Smith in the first one, but like Will Smith is one of those actors where it's like, I think with the exception of I Am Legend, has Will Smith ever died? Like, has his character ever died in a movie aside from I Am Legend? You know, obviously you have the off-screen death and Independence.
7 pounds.
Oh yeah, 7 pounds. That's right.
I believe iRobot, maybe.
Did he die in iRobot?
No. Okay, I haven't seen that movie in forever. I just felt like it was tragic.
The point that I'm trying to get at is that Will Smith is one of those actors where it's like, okay, again, it's kind of similar to like, in a weird way, the Margot Robbie, the Harley Quinn of it all, where it's like that's more so attributed to the actor than the character, but it's like the actor, it's like, okay, there's definitely like they're not gonna kill Will Smith at the end of like the first Suicide Squad, you know? But like Idris Elba, both kind of like with the type of actor that he is as opposed to Will Smith, like Idris Elba's not like a big name like lead superstar. He's been in a ton of blockbusters just in the last couple years alone, but he's not like a big name lead superstar. So poising him as the lead, I think is really interesting. Kind of it increases like the expendability of his character, and it makes him like more succinct with the team. And the fact that like the team, besides being like literally D-list characters, like aside from Harley Quinn and Captain Boomerang, because the first one, I know none of these guys. Well, I know Polka Dot Man because they've just been making a lot of jokes about him in recent years with some of the comic book properties that have come out. But like, I think that kind of the premise in and of itself is whereas how they're able to balance, like, okay, none of these characters might walk out of this movie alive at the end. And so they're able to kind of like mix and mesh and do these really interesting characteristics where Bloodsport, yeah, they have the setup as far as like, oh, he has the teenage daughter and that's why he's doing this mission. But like the relationship between them is completely different than the relationship between like Will Smith and them at the end. And I think that like they're able to balance out like the parts that like the more charming parts of Elba's, you know, charisma that have kind of been lost in the last couple blockbusters that he's in, with like kind of the ruthless nature of it and like the back and forth that he has with Cena, and then everything that they do with the Ratcatcher and Polka Dot Man characters as far as kind of making those two like the tragic hearts of the movie. Like it's exceptionally well done, especially since like with the Polka Dot Man character, David Dastmalchian is an actor who's like been popping up in these random comic book properties since The Dark Knight, and now he's in like, he's going to be like a crucial cast member in the Dune movie that's been coming out because of his relationships with Christopher Nolan and Denis Villeneuve. And he gets put in this movie. And like the whole thing, right, is Gunn said specifically with that character, he's like, no, I want this to be the most pathetic character possible. And then he ends up giving him this tragic backstory that in a way like really makes him the heart of the movie. And the same thing with the Ratcatcher character too, especially since like that actress who is like a first-timer actress, like I can't really explain like what it is and like how it is that he gets at it, because it's not like the Gamora and the Rocket Raccoon characters from Guardians of the Galaxy, where those are both like kind of big name celebrities, and like it kind of draws you in with like their inherent unlikability and then makes you like them by the end. But here, it's like they completely make these characters completely like really like engaging. Like they get you in with like the mystery and the veneer of the characters, and then they end up like completely winning you over by the end, even unfortunately with the Polka Dot Man death, which unfortunately for me is like the only death in the movie where I'm like, okay. Like that's like all the deaths in the movie for me worked, but that's the only death where I'm like, oh, this kind of felt like a fuck you death. Cause like he finally gets the superhero moment. He finally has a chance to actually like show off and prove everything that he's been working for, as far as like, yeah, his mom experimented on him. She wanted him to be a superhero and everything. And now he finally actually has the chance to be a superhero. And then he gets he just gets smushed. And I'm like,
yeah, I agree with you wholeheartely on that.
Yeah, like, because it was the whole thing. It's like, okay, it's like, that was such a Game of Thrones moment where it's like, oh, this is just there to like be like, because the whole movie had gone against the idea of just doing this shit for shock value's sake. And that was the only moment where I'm like, this feels like a shock value for shock value's sake, you know?
Yeah. And it's like a played out moment too. That kind of depth. Yeah.
It's like,
it kind of, it was a little upsetting after I thought a movie full of achievements in a genre, like I say all the time, which is just so one and the same. But honestly, if that's a complaint, it's a pretty good complaint considering the tangents we've had on this show about other superhero properties that have come out, not just recently, but just since the whole Marvel bubble really began. But I do agree with you guys in the sense that, like, yeah, it didn't quite feel as earned as I would have wanted it to. It certainly felt like not a studio quota, because I don't think Gunn plays that game, but it felt like something for the audience, and in a film that was so much, you could tell. I mean, personally, I felt just like an excellent display of like balancing what audiences want with true passion and like vision, unlike some other directors in the superhero genre. So it was a bit unfortunate, but I will say though, talking about Polka Dot Man, I thought the characterization and like this performance was outstanding. Like, I love when we would sort of get a chance to look through his eyes and see his mom. I thought it was hilarious. Normally that type of thing annoys me, but I think it was done in such a way where it's like, you can't not love this. And it's cool because, I mean, it showed that like, hey, you can have jokes in superhero movies. I mean, the Suicide Squad really lend themselves to a lot of humor, so you kind of need it, but it doesn't always have to be this cookie cutter, hey, minute 32, Kylo's going to look at Poe. Poe's going to look at Kylo. Do I speak? Do you speak? Stupid Disneyification of humor. Like, it can be a little interesting. It can be a little artsy and still make people laugh and fall for, you know, the joke that you want them to fall for in the moment. I just think this movie, like, the biggest thing I got out of it, and I want you guys' take on it, like, I think it's not going to be a blueprint for a way to sort of redefine the superhero genre, because I think the box office is going to speak louder than anything, and the lack of, it seems, viewers that have seen this movie. But I would love it to be sort of like, hey, we can approach this whole thing different. And it just doesn't seem to be the case. But I don't know. What's your guys' take on like some of the humor and the way it was implemented and sort of like, you know, this Marvel bubble that we live in?
Well, I definitely feel like, to kind of speak to the box office in and of itself, that we kind of have to take obviously as its own thing, obviously, because again, this still, unfortunately, I mean, it's the new normal, but it's still not, unfortunately, a normal box office time. But I definitely think that, like, in a normal box office time, I don't necessarily know if this would have done like Deadpool numbers, but I definitely think it would have done something similar to that. So we got to take that at the whole box office aspect with a grain of salt. But yeah, like, that's the thing just about Gunn as a director. His humor has always been so unique and so in and of itself. That's why, like, when the first Guardians of the Galaxy movie came out, even though we were kind of used to like the typical Marvel quote unquote brand of humor that had really been established obviously by both Robert Downey Jr. and then obviously with what Joss Whedon brought to that first Avengers movie, the humor that he brought to that first Guardians of the Galaxy movie just felt so unlike anything that we had really seen in Marvel up until that point. And Gunn has proven now time and time again that when it comes to just his sense of humor with how he characterizes them, it is so uniquely and wholly his own. In fact, that's part of the reason why I had such a problem with, at first, with Thor Ragnarok, was because I still wasn't as used to Taika's sense of humor, and I thought that just with like Taika was a pretty experienced director, but like, as far as like being brought in the way like Gunn had obviously had a couple years ahead of him, and I felt like everything that they were trying to do in Thor Ragnarok, I felt like they were trying to like almost not quite mimic Guardians, but like try to emulate a lot of the tone of Guardians, and it just wasn't working for me as well because Guardians had just made such this incredible stance. Obviously, we literally got in the second Guardians movie only a couple months before Thor Ragnarok, and I think that Gunn continues that. Gunn's greatest strength is his ability to mix and match the tragedy of these characters and using humor as their veneer. That's part of what makes Rocket Raccoon so appealing, is the fact that Rocket Raccoon uses his asshole veneer in order to cover up the fact that he feels so dejected and so rejected from everyone else and feels like he has no connection to anyone. And you kind of get that sense from each and every one of these characters in the movie, where every single one of them has daddy issues. Every single one of them is isolated. King Shark, literally his whole thing is just that he has no friends, ultimately, and he just wants, like, you know, this family, you know? Like, that's Gunn's greatest strength, and Gunn continues to do that in each and every one of his movies. And the fact that we're now 7 years, I even saw him post about it the other day, 7 years removed from the first Guardians, and everything that he's doing with his characters is still, like, on point. I say, like, just keep on going it, because this is, like, the one instance where it doesn't feel like studio mandated, oh, this has got to be funnier, oh, this has got to be more likable. It feels like, no, everything came from a sense of creativity, like, from a creative stance, which, again, from a blockbuster, like, it just makes this such more of a rare gem in today's day and age.
Oh yeah, I thought like it was hilarious, and like unlike the first film, like everybody in this movie had a distinct personality and sense of humor, and none of it felt forced, and none of it felt like it was like James Gunn was ripping off Guardians of the Galaxy, ironically, which the first one kind of did feel like. You know, even though it was trying to rip off Deadpool, ironically, but it felt like it was ripping off Guardians of the Galaxy. But everyone was great in this. Joel Kinnaman was funny too. They gave him a sense of humor. Idris Elba, I thought, was the best in the movie. I thought he was hilarious from the first frame he was on. I just thought he completely handled every tone he was given, and just the tie-wye line is just kills me. And just his story was just the most like compelling too, and his whole arc with like the rats and everything, his fear of rats, it wasn't like a silly one-off running gag either. Like, it was actually well written into the story, and the last shot of the film I thought was perfect with him.
Right, him and Sebastian finally getting over his fears and realizing, like, hey, you know, it doesn't have to always be like this. I thought it was, yeah, you're right. It was so expertly done. Like, that's a great way to do humor, you know? Everything should, I think, tie into the characterization of, especially in this type of movie, this ensemble, and it really worked in this film on so many different fronts. Now, my favorite performance, and I think it's her best performance as the character, was Harley Quinn. I thought Margot Robbie was amazing. I mean, she pretty much held down the entire B story, and the way it just converged with the A story, it was kind of like a masterclass in like action storytelling, I felt. Just like so perfectly they met up for the big final raid of the Nazi tower, and it was just so well done, because, you know, sometimes like B stories, they're like, oh, okay, cool, get me back to the main guys, and I was just like, what is she gonna do next? Like, she has me right now, she really does. And so I just thought, really, because, you know, thinking about what Dustin just said, and then how our nitpicks in the beginning, we even were able to justify one of them. I mean, this film, man, I know we're not quite there yet, but I'm excited to give my star rating, and I haven't felt that way in a long time.
I guess the only thing that I have to say about the Harley storyline, which again, like, I'm not you're Chris, I'm 100% with you. This is probably of the three performances that she's given, and like, she was everyone. That was the thing that everyone came away from the first one noting, is that Margot Robbie as Harley Quinn. I even back then, like, after seeing her in Wolf of Wall Street, I knew that she was gonna crush it as the character. But like, seeing now, like, kind of everything that she's been through, it's like that is they struck lightning. Well, they struck lightning with that casting, just in general, just how good she is, just as far as nailing all the mannerisms, just completely nailing everything that it is that people love about that character, making her comic book accurate, managing to nail the balance of like the tone with like kind of her ditzy personality with her more psychotic side and everything. And you're right, because this totally could have fallen into the trap of being like, oh, this is just a B storyline that ties us over until we get back to the A storyline, but it totally wasn't. Everything that they had going on with her and the Dictator character, which, by the way, the Dictator characters, again, for a character that could have been just one-off stock generic villains, like, they actually injected like quite a lot of humor and quite a lot of intrigue into those characters. And the way that they handled the whole Harley and the Dictator, what was his name, Silvio Luna relationship, and kind of how that ended up resolving itself with basically when he admits it, like, he's gonna use Starro to like blackmail the world and like experiment and kill children and like maintain control over his gun. And she just shoots him just straight up right there without a second's hesitation, and then says, I told myself that the next time I would get into a relationship with someone that I would immediately kill him if there were any red flags. Like, they just handle it perfectly. They know exactly what they're doing with this character. They know that this character is like probably their most marketable character, just as far as like this sex
It was
goes.
perfect character growth, I thought. In the best way possible, because it was so true to her personality and the performances we've gotten from her in the past as Harley Quinn. I thought it was brilliant.
Yeah, and like the action sequences when like he's pulling a little bit from Matthew Vaughn with like showing off like all of like the like the color, the graphics in the background when she's going through the hallway killing everyone, and then when she meets up with everyone and just like the reaction, like that was a scene that we kind of knew of from the trailer, but it was still freaking hilarious. And then when she's doing like the back and forth, like when they're interrogating the thinker before they go in, like it's expertly well done. I think that she blended in perfectly. It's funny because like for a majority of it, I was like, okay, so Harley's pretty much off on doing her own thing, while the rest of the squad we have is making. I'm like, how are they gonna mix and mesh these two? And it ended up working out perfectly well. Like I love how they still even managed to get her like the final shot when she's the one that ultimately gets the last jab at Starro. Which, speaking of which, not to jump tide too quickly, but only like how do you guys think they handled the Starro character? Because it's weird because I don't know if you guys remember, but like one of the biggest criticisms about the first movie was, why are they sending in the Suicide Squad, who relatively don't have that many superpowers, against like a magical like giant CG villain threat? And then Gunn does the same thing here, where he has the Suicide Squad, who, with the exception of King Shark and Polka Dot Man, don't really have superpowers per se, against a giant fucking CG like creature that can literally create his own zombified army. Like, what did you guys think of that?
Well, the thing that was cool about it was like Amanda Waller didn't send them there for that. Like, she almost kills them for going back into fighting, and then the girl, hit Amanda Waller. But like, I thought they handled it incredibly well, that character. I mean, the Peter Capaldi character, there was some unexplained kind of abuse going on between him and Starro or whatever. That wasn't really explained, but from a visual standpoint, it was so crazy to look at. And it was one of the grossest villains I've ever seen, in a good way. Like, it was gross in like an effective way. It was like with the squids coming out of the armpits or whatever they were, and they were coming out of the armpits and they were going on the faces. It was just gory, and they were practical too. I'm pretty sure those things. The practical effects were insane, and the visual effects, they were seamless, and it was just completely gross. But that was the feeling you were supposed to feel, and I liked it a lot.
And they even, at the end, when Starro inevitably dies, because it is this type of movie where they're going to defeat the big bad, they justify his motivations. He was happy floating in space, but the humans had to go and mess it all up.
And as Peter Capaldi brings out, the American government is the one that brought them in, that brought him into the space station.
And it's just so amazing the way that, like you said when we were watching the film together last night, Dom, they can make you feel for the big bad kaiju who's destroying the city. It was awesome. It really was.
It was unbelievable. And also, shout out to Taika
can
Waititi.
I just say?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. I just want to say, before we get too far away from Dustin's sentiment, visually he was stunning. Like, he looked so good.
They really
couldn't believe it.
They really fucking nailed that.
It felt real. Nothing about the way that they chose to employ him in the combat scene. The combat scene felt forced. It felt like, wow, if there was a giant starfish from outer space that was attacking a city, this is kind of what I think it would look like. And I was really impressed by that.
And again, for all the criticism that the Marvel movies get for kind of, again, the generic CG-filled third acts, just kind of, not at all paying attention to just human and civilian casualties, how it only ends up being the superheroes. They just cause massive collateral damage with no repercussions whatsoever. And this movie actually did its diligence, not only with expertly choreographed and really well done action sequences where you could actually tell what was going on for the majority of it, but also like the human casualties, like the whole thing that, to me, that like made this third act work, where so many other third acts don't, is that they specifically say, no, when these things get taken over, there is no going back. They are dead. They are literally walking corpses. And the fact that you see the amount of destruction that Starro causes, and they're about to walk away, and finally their consciousnesses kick in, and they're like, we can't let this happen. We're going to let this entire island get destroyed. Forget the fact that who knows what will happen if Starro actually takes over the island. Like, Amanda Waller is literally willing to let, like you said, just regular innocent children, like, die just at the expense of this. Like, just from a PR standpoint, obviously, like, besides the fact that this is televised all over the place, I definitely feel like that wouldn't play out well. But just in general, like, I think
where did the cameras come from?
Yeah.
Why was there just news footage at the end?
Well, you know how that goes in superhero movies. There's always just like that random news
that
footage.
scene of Storm Reed going, "That's my dad." Like
that was the only moment where I'm like, okay, they needed to put that in there in order to tie that over, because Storm Reed really doesn't have anything else to do with this movie.
Why would they like report on escaped convicts being heroes? Like, I don't even understand like the reporting they were doing. Like,
yeah, you're right.
Oh,
Maybe
man.
not a 5-star film, but probably damn near close. But no, I thought I thought the whole third act was just so incredible, like from the convergence of the B and the A story and just watching the team sort of just infiltrate and do their thing. And then, of course, like the classic double cross, the twist on the twist was awesome with one Peacemaker being sort of like the double agent or maybe the secret agent of Amanda Waller is probably a better word there. And it just all felt so believable in a movie that, honestly, at its core and probably from an elevator pitch, sounds so silly. The fact that they were able to just make this so convincing and really sell you on it, I think that's its greatest achievement when it's all said and done. Aside from like such creative filmmaking that was like very artistic at times, like there's this one scene where they did sort of like those graphics that were throughout the movie, and it was practical and it was depth of field, and there was different sort of like bent rusted objects from like a broken building sort of giving you whatever the word was, and they pan away and I'm like, holy shit, this is like, that's art. That's like high art. Like that's an incredible shot to capture, and it's happening in the Suicide Squad 2. Like this movie, man, this movie. I'm running out of things to say about it because I feel like, at least for me, I
only have one other thing that I want to bring up, which unfortunately is, we've been doing so well, like actually just talking about the movie and not talking about the factors outside the movie, but we got to talk about it because unfortunately, I think it is going to spell, unfortunately, what is going to be the future of just this franchise, just in general, which is unfortunately the film's box office. The film, as much, and God damn it, they tried with the positive, with all of the great criticism on Twitter and all of the like the positive reinforcement and Gunn and the cast doing all these interviews and everything, it still unfortunately could not salvage the box office. 12.2 million opening weekend, which is pitiful. Like that is bad. They needed this movie to do 25 million minimum just to opening. Like 12.2, that is scary as far as that goes. And like, it's interesting because this is not a Black Widow situation where it's like, oh, this was on streaming, so therefore nobody was gonna go out to see it in the theaters. No, it's like I heard that like there was more of like, you know, bad word of mouth from the first one, that this was rated R, like all that, but like it was really confusing because as far as marketing goes, this movie nailed everything. So like, I don't know, like what are your guys' thought process? Like, is this solely because of the pandemic? Is this because of everything that's been happening, obviously, with theaters just in general? Is this what the quality movies like? Talk to me about, like, what does it have to do with that?
I think it's because the Delta variant is like around now, so people are getting more paranoid. So I guess less people are going to theaters right now, I guess, starting now. And that's why Suicide Squad didn't perform as well as it clearly should have, because of how great the reaction's been overly positive. Like, it's just, everyone loves it. And now, like, I guess it's because that's the devil, you know, of HBO Max, because like it's available on HBO Max, and like I guess it's so easy to access there. This is what I've been saying to you about streaming for years, Dominic, about like how like if it's available online, people are, it's like, why go to a theater to pay $20 or $16 for a ticket and more for snacks and everything? It was like, just stay home and watch it in perfect quality. I mean, it is meant to be in the theater, but I totally get why it's not performing well. And it has mainly to do because of HBO Max and the pandemic still, the round 3 of pandemic or whatever it is. And, maybe if this wasn't on HBO Max or available to stream, it would be, you would have gotten like a 25 million plus box office probably for this. But that's my answer.
Yeah, I think it's a great answer. And the only point I'll add is I think obviously the DCEU hasn't done the best job of sowing confidence with its audience. It clearly has its diehards, but even then, I think that there's a lot of infighting between the DC fans, who's more for the Snyderverse, who's more for outside of it. And of course, like the original Suicide Squad is arguably their worst received film. I mean, maybe one Emancipation of Harley Quinn might be a little worse, but like
Wonder
it's
Woman
up there.
84 got some pretty bad
but it's like probably in the big 3 of like their blunders right now. So I just think like it didn't sow too much confidence, even though this pretty much is, in my opinion, like a rebrand of the Suicide Squad in the best way possible. I think they're still sort of riding that debacle of 2016. I just think it's bad when your headline, looking back on it, is more so about an potential entanglement than the actual film itself. Like, what does that say about the movie? If we're not even talking about the movie, we're talking about pop culture zeitgeist around it years later.
We've been talking about that a lot with movies recently.
But I think that is probably the smallest of the factors that impact why this movie is performing the way it does. I think what you and Dustin brought up clearly have take precedent over that, but I also think like that is a part of it as well.
Yeah, it's just unfortunate because like we wanted it. I think everyone wanted this to be like kind of the official, right? We obviously got the Zack Snyder cut of Justice League earlier this year, but I think people wanted so badly for this to be like the rebranding, like, you know, the reemergence of like, yes, DC is a factor, and yes, we can finally start getting good movies from them again. And like if Warner Brothers, if this obviously did the money that everyone wanted it to, it's like Warner Brothers might be willing to like take more risk and push it in more of a direction, so we start getting more movies like this between this and then obviously we're getting the Matt Reeves Batman movie in March. But like unfortunately, like we know they only follow the dollars, and obviously we know everything is going towards streaming now, and it just sucks because it's ultimately going to make the chances of more of these types of movies happening less, not more, which is just it's really unsatisfying. But ultimately, if we're getting into final thoughts now, this is easily like there's an argument to be made that this is the best movie so far this year. We obviously still have the rest of this year, but like this is one of the best to come out of it. Everything about this movie works. To kind of echo our sentiments that we said at the beginning, this literally does not have a bad part. It's so entertaining. It's so engrossing. The violence, while excessive, is not tasteless, let's say. It's all really well done. Every single character in this works. Gunn once again pulls off another home run, another slam dunk. This is a 4.5 out of 5 star out of 5 for me. It's this close to a 5. It's this close, but there are certain things that hold it back from being that perfect 5, but it's a 4.5 for me, easily.
Yeah, for sure. I'm right there with you, Dom. This is a 4.5 out of 5 stars for me as well. It really instills some confidence in the Peacemaker show. I was a little skeptical about that, especially coming off Cena's performance in F9. But if he can replicate even half of what he did in this movie, I think him being the lead in a series sounds pretty okay with me. Because even though this film wasn't received the way that we probably all here would have hoped it would have been, it's still super charming, so enjoyable, completely just like knocked me off my feet in the way that I would never have expected. And so I think it deserves to be seen, and I hope the word gets out eventually. And it's unfortunate because I do think circumstances notwithstanding, we would be talking about the success of this film a little bit more than we're able to with a measly $12.2 million. But yeah, 4.5 out of 5 stars for me. And Dustin, what is your star rating and final thoughts, man?
All right. Well, most importantly, like I said, like it's so funny and so dark and so violent and completely entertaining the whole way through. But most importantly, it was not disappointing. This is one of the only movies in the last 2 or 3 years that really, truly didn't disappoint. It was funny. It was great. And I loved it. 4.5 out of 5. James Gunn might be the greatest, superhero film director of all time. And it's probably the most audacious superhero adaptation since Kick-Ass, the original Kick-Ass back in 2010. And I just had a ball with it. 4.5.
110%. Absolutely. So people, with that being said, that is our official review of the Suicide Squad. In order to differentiate, I know Chris has been calling it Suicide Squad too throughout of it. My whole thing is the first one is just Suicide Squad. This one is the Suicide Squad. I wonder if they do end up making another actual movie of these and not just like doing a bunch of TV spinoffs, if they'll actually like call it something else, like maybe like another Suicide Squad or something like that. But people, what are your thoughts on these Suicide Squad? Let us know in the comment section below. Be sure to click the subscribe button, click the like button. You guys know what to do as far as all that goes. Dustin, first time actually being on the podcast. You crushed it, man. First off, thank you for coming on. This was an absolute treat. Seriously, thank you for this. Where can the good people find you online?
You can find me on Mr. G Movie Reviews. You can look up, my videos there. Mr. G Movie Reviews. And I haven't been making videos for a little bit, but you can still watch my old ones, and I might be making new ones soon. And you can leave a link for my letterbox too. I'd appreciate that.
Absolutely.
Or follow me on Twitter at
Sounds good. Yeah, all of Dustin's links will be in the description below. And of course, man, it was a pleasure having you on again. I hope to have you back on the show sometime. This was a great conversation, and thanks again for joining us, dude.
Absolutely. Chris, where can the good people find you?
Yeah, they can find me anywhere you can find our podcast, at Christian Evanko. Evanko spelled Evanko. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, you know the whole deal. And in all those services, there's a nifty little link in the bio tool, which you can click to obviously find a pathway back to Talking TV, but you're already here, so I don't think you really need to know about that. And Dom will tell you about that in a few minutes anyways. So the other stuff I have going on, I make music. It's on Spotify, Apple Music, SoundCloud, Google Play, YouTube Music. All the platforms, hit the link in my bio. It's right there. Super easy to find, as well as my second podcast, a show about life, music, and everything in between, titled Talkin' with Andrew and Chris. Talkin' spelled the same way we spell it here. Again, available through the link in my bio. Thank you guys again so much for tuning into our podcast. The subscribers continue to grow up, and it's really humbling. It means a lot. So thank you. And Dom, man, take it away, dude.
You guys know me, posting sarcastic things on Facebook, occasional movie news, and occasional weird pictures on Instagram. But like I said, I think still the most recent thing on my Instagram is whatever the fuck Jared Leto's makeup do in the upcoming House of Gucci movie is on my Instagram and Facebook, which you can find at Movie Nerd Reviews on both platforms. But more importantly, you can find me posting every single day, twice a day on our social media platforms at Talkin' TV Podcast, no G, on both Facebook and Instagram. Thanks to Dustin for coming here and crushing it for his first time on the podcast. This was the Suicide Squad podcast, 12 seasons in a short film, and watch more fucking movies.